October over the next 2 to 3 weeks, I think would give a really good feeling before we've reached the time that we have to pull the trigger on, is it in the budget or is it not in the budget? So I do believe that we have time on our side, that we could do the 3-5 grade band as early as next school year. Part of my projected cost includes what is anecdotally known as, I've used the word anecdotally 100 times. When you crunch the video, I'm going to tally it and laugh at myself. It is something you could go back and look at. It's called white glove service. And that is, instead of the device coming, box, saran wrap, everything here, and us having to configure individually, you go through the vendor and you say, these are my specifications, and you pay a premium to purchase. That is another reason why we may not necessarily need a tech, because they are being delivered ready to roll. And that's part of it, so. Absolutely. I'll stand here if you got one.
You identified the peer group schools, and you have a couple in here that gave no information. Is that because you were looking at this on the website and didn't find it, or did they not reply back to you?
Sometimes they didn't return my phone calls. I can tell you, everyone, we absolutely looked at their website, we looked at the technology plans. Some of them, the most recent technology plans expired in 2013. That was the most recent thing. I mean, I stalked board minutes, the committee stalked board minutes. We were looking for any shred of piece of something we could find, and the no information schools, it really came up, like our phone calls, our emails, nothing came back. I couldn't tell you why that is.
Thank you.
Probably one of the most complicated presentations I've witnessed, and the subject matter is enormous. So I thank you for that part. But I want to know, how is it going to be used in a history class? How is it going to be used in a liberal arts class, language arts? How is it going to be used in a math class? And I'd almost like to see examples of current learning practice versus with the technology, and how is it going to be different? How is teaching going to be different? I ask my phone, how do I find, Joe's garage? I used to know how to get there, and I almost don't know anymore. I have to ask my phone. You're talking about a tremendous change in the way teaching is going to have to be done, in the way learning is being done. Thinking is a problem. If I ask my phone, I don't have to think. And here we have this technology in our nation, and yet we're more divided probably than ever in our history. That's maybe not true, but my gosh, if the right answer is on the computer, well, maybe I'm not going to agree with it. So, how are you going to get multiple feedback and multiple ideas if there's one answer? I don't know. I think it's very, very complicated what you're talking about.
Absolutely.
I almost think you have to go through in each subject area, and you have to go through, well, gee, how are we going to use the technology to teach, and how is it going to change things? And you have to do that by subject. Very, very complicated. I don't think the answer is not how soon can we get the computers or the technology. The answer is how soon can we come to grips with how we're going to teach with this new technology, and how are we going to keep America, if you will. I don't like the idea of one answer and it's right, and we're not going to have to think. Just ask the computer, and who's got the right answer? Well, it's X. I don't like that. I think that the teaching profession, I think a ton of this has to be looked at. I mentioned maps. I'm on the computer 2 or 3 hours a day. I think differently. Now, do I do email? No, wait a minute. Do I do email? No.
I'll take part of
But
the
I'm
question.
using Lotus 1, 2, 3, and I'm using spreadsheets, and I'm using the computer. computer to do my thinking for me in part, but I don't think I think any different. And I think what you're proposing with this technology, you might change the way people think, and that bothers me a little bit. I've got stuff all over this page, and it wasn't organized. What a subject you presented to us. I didn't even have a blank piece of paper. I need hours to think about what you got here.
If I may, I probably, forgive me for being a little remiss here, I breezed over the high school presentation and just listed the departments off on the right side on that slide. If you go into, I said it was a hot link, and I'm sure Mr. Markarian, we can provide that presentation at length. They did go into each department ad nauseum. It's probably a 30-slide presentation of it in itself. Yeah, Ms. Woolridge, you were there at that presentation. They were very detailed. So that would give you a great overview of how the business department felt it would increase, how math, how fine and practical arts, how woodshop felt. I mean, they really did. I breezed through and gave you one example from biology of something I saw with my eyes. But each department gave their own, here's why we need it and how we could benefit. But I would hope, before I turn things over, because I know Alex has been waiting here to chime in with some information, I don't think it's about changing the way they think. I mean, I know they can Google the right answer. I mean, I could Google how to say something in Spanish, but the reality of it is I still wouldn't know what I'm saying. I think it's really the mindset is the shift of, you have this information, now use it. When I go to replace the hardwood floors in my house, I can look up how to do it and watch a video, but at a certain point, I've got to know how to apply that information. And when I hit the first problem, like my subfloor is uneven, well, what do I do with that? Do I just continue following the video, or do I now have to, think for a little bit and bypass that problem? I know it's a different problem-solving mindset because there's much more information available at their fingertips, but I think it gets to, we're not looking at rote memorization. We're not looking at them for just have pure fact recall. We're looking at them for to analyze and make great decisions. And I think you'll see that if you look at...
Why do I need the teacher anymore if I have the technology? Why don't I just, how do I install that floor? And I'm going to let the computer tell me how to do it, and it probably can do it better than most teachers. I mean, you're talking about such a tremendous change, and I would like to see those presentations.
You need
I
a...
hope so would the board. So that's my 2 cents.
I've been holding him off, I'm sorry.
You need a certain foundation, and that's why we have a teacher, and the technology allows us to get to the next level. The other piece is that's why we wanted the stakeholders to come in and to look at the lessons in the classroom, and perhaps you could join some of the other board members to see a social studies lesson, language arts lesson, and you'll see how technology is used.
I think it can also destroy the learning of the kids in the district if you don't do it right.
It has to be done right.
And just take something like your iPad. People all of a sudden, they're not getting married, they're not having children, they're staying in their rooms, loneliness. There's a whole lot of things going on there that is just beginning to surface. You're talking about something tremendous here too.
Well, I like the way that your presentation was really focused on improving educational outcomes. It's not using technology to displace education, it's using it to enhance education. The breakdown...
That's what they said, but they didn't prove it.
The breakdown by curricular area that you were asking about, Mike, all that information was provided to the board months ago.
Come on, that's a bunch of crap.
Well, can I make a suggestion?
Yeah, but before you do that, because I've just been accused of spouting a bunch of crap, just by a show of hands for the people who were on the board about 5 or 6 months ago, do you recall getting an email with links to all of the different curricular areas? Yeah. The board received...
I don't mind saying you talk crap, because I still think you are. I don't care whether the others go along with you or not. Did the public know about this?
Yes,
Or
because...
has this been done behind closed doors?
That's why we give everybody the list.
That's why we had a presentation last spring with Mr. Misiak and Mr. Barone, and that's why we asked for a follow-up presentation, and decorum prevents me from responding to your other comment.
I'm here only to challenge that, otherwise I wouldn't bother coming. But I think more learnings have to be
Please.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much. Board members, thank you for your questions.
Thank you.
I really appreciate the effort that went into it. I'd like to suggest that maybe since what you were proposing there sort of at the end was to arrange some visitations that I go ahead and work with the team to start coming up with some opportunities for you to see some lessons in October. Okay? Great. Okay, let's move on. We've got a full agenda.
Thank you very much.
It's always done. How many more to go?
Once again, I want to thank Mr. Misiak and Mr. Blinder one more time for that incredibly thorough and detailed presentation. I know my mind is swimming right now, but we have to get back to regular business, and we are up to item number 9, the superintendent's report. I believe there are 2 items to be moved. May I have a motion, please? And you're going to have to raise your hands high. Mrs. Korn, thank you. May I have a second? Mrs. Gray. Mr. Markarian, do you want to? No comments on it? We're just going to have a roll call vote, please.
Mr.
Unless
Burr?
there are any questions.
I'm going to ask a question. Item number 9, can you tell me what it is?
Well, item number 9 is the superintendent's report, and there are 2 items under it, items 1
Can
and
you at
2.
least read the 2 items so I can...
Sure. So the 2 items are the HIB self-assessments. Every year, the schools have to do a self-assessment using the NJDOE's essentially report card that you score yourself on. So we have to submit that we have completed those self-scorings and accept the self-scorings. That's something that is required of us on an annual basis. So that is what that first piece is about.
Has there been a presentation to the board at all on the...
We report out every 6 months on our HIB statistics. We did that last spring, and we'll be doing it again, I believe, in October. We're going to do the second report of the HIBN Code of Conduct for last school year in the spring semester. You're always reporting 1 semester after the period has ended. There's 2 reporting periods each year. And so for the second reporting period of the 16-17 school year, we'll report out on that this fall, and we'll also report out on the Code of Conduct information from the entire 16-17 school year. We also have planned for later in the school year our presentations to include the results of the culture and climate surveys, which I'd really like to emphasize over the less than excited feedback I've gotten on some of the other Code of Conduct and HIB reports, so hopefully we can spend more of our time on the culture and climate
So
surveys.
item number 1 is saying that we're doing the work, we're not going to report on the latest session, but we're following state code.
Yes, yeah, we have to submit our self-assessments, and we need a resolution to show that we're doing
But is
that.
that a summary, or is it, when you
It's-
say self-assessment, I don't know whether our HIB program is improving or not. It's, what's the assessment?
So this is done annually, Mike. We've done this every year the last few years. What the school safety teams have to do is assess the quality of their programming and that they have certain programming that the state requires in place. So the scores are up to 77. 77 is the total possible. You'll note that all of those documents were included in the board packet that went out, and 74 was the lowest score. So all of our schools felt like they are meeting the programming requirements that the state of New Jersey sets forth in accounting for HIB programming. But that was in the board packet that went out for the 6 buildings.
Couple weeks ago?
Went out I think it went out Friday. It was the most recent board packet.
And you're not going to present it?
We've never presented that. We've never presented this piece. the scores don't get presented. We do every 6 months the HIB reports and code of conduct. These are also available on the website, and these will be available after tonight.
And the second item?
That's approving the trip to Quebec City, assuming they have enough interested folks.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions before we have a roll call? All right, Mr. McLaughlin?
Mr. Byrne,
I'm going to abstain on one, I'll vote yes on two.
Mrs. Gray,
Yes.
Dr. Dunton,
Yes.
Mr. Fry,
Yes.
Mrs. Richmond,
Yes.
Mrs. Korn,
Yes.
Mrs. Wooldridge,
Yes.
Mrs. McCune,
Yes.
Mrs. Swerner,
Yes.
Madam President.
So we are now up to public comment on agenda items only. Once again, want to remind you, please come up to address the board, state your name and address, sign in, limit your comments to 5 minutes, and please only come up once during each comment section.
Good evening, Alexandra Schwartz, 67 Bernard Drive. Thank you to Mr. Misiak and Mr. Blinder for a very detailed and passionate presentation. I had a question about the rollout plan. So the rollout plan anticipates that we replace all of the current devices in the elementary schools and move them in chunks to the middle school and high school. As Mr. Misiak pointed out during the presentation, the need at the middle school is probably the greatest. And also at the high school, we have that security concern over the BYOD policy. But there weren't any issues identified at the elementary school level with the current policy. So I was wondering, why do we then start with a rollout at the elementary level and give all of those older devices to the other students? Did they look at any other rollout plans, and why was this particular one selected? Could we maybe say we start off with the middle school, or maybe say that high school, the current students are kind of getting fresh grandfathered in, and then 2018, 2019, we start with the freshmen with the with abolishing the BYOD policy, and then move up there. So I was just wondering about the rationale of the current
Okay,
approach.
thank you. Are there any other public comments on agenda items?
James Vopel, 20 Evergreen Place. Mr. Misiak gave a very detailed presentation, and I took extensive notes, and I have several questions. Talking about purchasing 30 devices per classroom in the elementaries. The issue that I have with that, first of all, what is the class cap for elementary classrooms? Is it 25 students? Is it 23 students? And, you know, what do you allow for overages in terms of when you go over a certain number? Do you open up a new section for that particular grade? And just crunching some numbers quickly, if you have 4 sections of, say, 3rd grade, that would leave you with, let's say, 23 is the class average, and you have excess of 7 devices. You only have 28 extra devices that you have for that particular grade that you can share amongst others in the building. What happens when you have to increase a section? When enrollment increases? I know right now we're currently in a downturn. We know that in enrollment there are ebbs and flows in enrollment. So right now we're in a downturn. But what happens when that begins to increase and now we have to add sections in the elementary school? How will that be accommodated in terms of the budget? And then how do you decide when you have to create another section? How does this also impact the STEM or STEAM classes? Because we all know that we need support devices. I know in our building where I teach, we've purchased a 3D printer. We have other printers that need upgrading and repair. So how is that cost going to be added into this initiative? To Mrs. Korn's point, what I think we're losing in technology, I use technology myself in my classroom. I don't use it a lot because I truly believe that social interaction is the key to a good elementary school foundation, and the fact that students now really don't know how to interact with each other socially. That's my personal experience. There's a lot more natural conflict going on. Why? Because they're on their devices. I go out to eat with my family. What are people doing? They're not conversing. They're on their iPhones or iPads. Okay, this is a problem in our society. And if we introduce a one-to-one on a consistent basis, I think we're going to be taking away from the socialization of our kids, allowing them to interact with each other and in a positive way. Devices can be great, don't get me wrong, I use them myself, but I think you have to understand that there are going to be some problems with this type of initiative in school. Also, to Mrs. Korn's point, if you're using a device K to 2, okay, this is when you're supposed to be developing fine and gross motor skills, and what are they doing? Swiping. How is that going to help their fine and gross motor skills with learning how to write? Now, who knows? Maybe in the future we're never going to have to sign our names to a legal document again. I don't know. But the fact remains that students need to be able to read and write, and they should not be they should not have a device to rely upon in order to be able to do those types of things. So those are just my comments and concerns regarding Mr. Misiak's presentation. Hopefully those will be addressed in a future presentation because I think those are some key issues. Thank you.
Thank you.
South Findlay, just two quick things about the rollout. I am a teacher at the school district of the Chathams. We just went one-to-one. One thing I know you said was that the teachers were not going to be provided with the Chromebooks. What we did was the teachers were given the Chromebooks a year in advance. We had PD, we were able to use them. The fact that we were able to become comfortable with them before they were rolled out provided us with a lot more, I think, security, understanding, take away some of that, knowing the kids know more than we do. At least we had the Chromebooks before they did. We had a year's full of PD with people in the building, which was terrific because we sent some people to Google training, which I'm sure you have done and which is what's going on at the present time. But it definitely helped that we were able to take them home. We could use them. We had to submit everything through Google, and it just helped with the transition, if that's just something to add. Another thing is the log-on times. I know you said that you weren't going to provide them to every student to take with them for the day. The log-on time definitely does take away from instructional time. So if a student has to walk into every classroom, it takes a while to log on to the network. And with their Chromebooks now, they're on all day long. They don't log off. So really you eliminate that time that you lose 5-7 minutes sometimes with log-on time. Problem is with the charging. So just some things to think about, which I'm sure you have already, but the fact that we're using them, thought that would be helpful.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello, Janak Munshi. I'm a freshman at Ridge this year, and I kind of agree with the rollout plan for the technology. I think it's a good idea for the one-to-one, but it shouldn't be for every class. Maybe it should just be certain classes that really require it, especially for the STEAM program. Some of the programs we use, like the PLTW, it was a kind of problem in the beginning of the year. We couldn't get our logins. So instead of focusing maybe on like the whole one-to-one thing, we could focus more on implementing the technology better and like making sure that even though we have the technology, it works to our advantage and it's not just sitting there in the classroom, that it's not meaningful to the lesson. And also about the time to log on. I was taking a test today, and instead of filling out the Scantron for multiple choice, we could just use a Google form or something like that. But that kind of poses a problem with academic integrity, as you know, you could just have a student like looking up the answers on a Google, and it doesn't make sense that we would have that much technology in a classroom as academic integrity becomes a problem. And I know we have like assemblies and stuff every year, every marking period on academic integrity and HIB, but sometimes it doesn't work, and we need to have like more awareness for that kind of thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other public comments on agenda items? Great, so I am going to close that section of our agenda. First of all, I always feel like I have to thank and acknowledge our students who come out and spend their evening with us. Your time and your thoughtful comments are really appreciated, so thank you so much for that. I made a note of a few things that I'm sure our technology people noted also about login issues, academic integrity, charging issues. And also, I'm sorry, Bridget, I didn't catch your last name, but I liked this idea of giving the teachers the device in advance to get familiar with it. So all of those things have been noted. There were a few questions I think Mr. Markarian was going to handle.
Yeah, I took notes as well, and I think what I'd like to do is meet with the team, and the next time we bring this up for discussion, which I think will probably be at the second board meeting in October after we've had a chance to do some classroom visits, we'll make sure we get these questions answered.
Great, so we are now up to approval of the minutes. There is one motion. Will someone move it, please? Mr. Fry, may I have a second? Mrs. Wooldridge, are there any questions or comments before we approve the minutes? All right, Mr. McLaughlin, we're ready for a roll call.
Mr. Byrd?
Yes.
Mrs. Gray?
Yes.
Dr. Dunton?
Yes.
Mr. Fry?
Yes.
Mrs. Richmond?
Yes.
Mrs. Korn?
Yes.
Mrs. Wooldridge?
Yes.
Mrs. McCune?
Yes.
Mrs. Swerner?
Yes.
Madam President?
We're now up to committee reports, starting with finance. There are 27 items to be moved. May I have a motion, please? Mrs. Wooldridge, may I have a second? Mrs. Korn? Mrs. Wooldridge, do you have anything to explain or report?
Yeah, I do. Okay. So the Finance Committee met on September 20th. So the first agenda item was an update on the Oak Street HVAC project. And as of the 20th of September, the project was complete except for testing the heating system. So the testing was scheduled to be done on Thursday.
It was done.
And it was done, and was it successful?
Yes.
Yeah, and it was successful. So now the project is complete. And the heating system needs to be turned on by October 15th per state statute. We also had an update on our demographer. So by mid-October, the district is going to provide our demographer with student enrollment data from Aspen in the NJ Smart format. And then after he receives the data, he's going to produce a study within approximately 3 months. And once the study is complete, it will be presented to the board. It will include information on births, enrollment trends, enrollment projections, new housing growth, and turnover of existing homes in the community. The committee also had a brief update on self-funded health insurance. The committee discussed self-funded health insurance option at the May 17th finance meeting. And in the meantime, since then, Arthur Gallagher has completed a preliminary analysis and provided it to Mr. McLaughlin. He has some questions, and we'll meet with Arthur Gallagher to discuss them, and then it will be, more information will be presented to the Finance Committee. The Every Student Succeeds Act, which is a federal act, has new reporting requirements for Title I funds, and every fund now needs to be tracked at the school building level, so Mr. McLaughlin has staff working on this. And then on the agenda, I just wanted to make note of 3 donations. So There is a $5,000 donation for Ridge cheerleading mats from several organizations, including the Ridge High School Booster Club, the Ridge Competition Cheerleading Team, the Ridge Spirit Cheerleading Team, and Ridge Youth Sports Incorporated. There's also the Bernard's Parents of Exceptional Children donated $5,000 in support of the Ridge High Greenhouse and the behavioral disability programs. And then we also have a donation of $48,300 from the Ridge Diamond Club in the form of renovations to the dugouts at the varsity baseball field. And the Ridge Diamond Club will oversee these renovations. So I just want to thank all these organizations for their generous donations. Does anybody have any questions?
All right, can we have a vote, please?
Mr. Byrne?
Yes?
Mrs. Gray?
Yes.
Dr. Dunton?
Yes.
Mr. Fry?
Yes.
Mrs. Richmond?
I'm abstaining from number 10 and yes to the rest.
Mrs. Korn?
Yes.
Mrs. Wooldridge?
Yes.
Mrs. McCune?
Yes.
Mrs. Swerner?
Yes.
Madam President?
We have the best support organizations in this town. I want to thank them again. These are a lot of very generous donations. So thanks again to the Ridge Diamond Club, the Bernards Township Parents for Exceptional Children, the Ridge High School Booster Club, the Ridge Competition Cheerleading Team, the Ridge Spirit Cheerleading Team, and Ridge Youth Sports. It's just incredible. Personnel, we have an addendum, so I believe there are 29 items to be moved. May I have a motion, please? Mrs. McEwen, may I have a second? Mrs. Wooldridge, Mrs. McEwen?
The Personnel Committee met on September 15th, and I can discuss a couple of items that we talked about at that meeting, several of which are on the agenda tonight. So if you notice on the agenda tonight, item number 22 is Mr. McLaughlin's, the business administrator's merit goals to be approved. The first merit goal is to improve district safety by facilitating installation of a Bluetooth-based building access system and integrated alarm system at Ridge. And the second goal is to improve district safety by facilitating installation of 3M or similar window film products at Mount Prospect, Liberty Corner, and Oak Street. Cedar Hill already has it because it was installed last year during the project to enhance the entryway for security. So there's more detail in the agenda about those goals. The Personnel Committee also discussed the superintendent's contract because there have been changes to the law regarding superintendent salaries. And so the committee discussed replacing Mr. Markarian's current contract with a new one that has addresses these changes in the law. It would not have a difference in material charge to the cost of his salary to the district. So basically, the gist of it is there is more flexibility in terms of whether or not we choose to have Mr. Markarian have merit goals versus putting that money in salary. So the cost wouldn't change to the district, but the board feels that it would be more beneficial to change the way that we're doing that because the merit goals are very time-consuming and there's a lot of hoops to jump through with the county, and we feel like Mr. Markarian's time would be better spent focusing on the stuff that he's already doing anyway, which is the merit goals. So let's see. I think Mr. Markarian wanted to say something about item number 8 on the agenda. I'll let him do that in a second. There was one more thing that we talked about at the meeting that I wanted to report out on. The committee, Mr. Syatt talked to the committee about the fact that 2 years ago we added a .6 floating nurse who rotates between all the various schools to help with paperwork, screenings, and doing different field trips and accompanying students to programs. We've also, because of the need for substitute nurses, having to hire substitute nurses for a fair number of trips, and also BOE nurses to accompany special education students to some of their different programs. So Mr. Syatt recommended that if we made the .6 nurse full-time, it would reduce the need for these substitute nurses and the BOE nurses, and it would be more cost effective to the district. And Mr. Markarian, I think you wanted to say something about item number 8 on personnel.
Yes, actually, I think both Mr. Syed and I were going to jump in a little bit and talk about item number 8, which is to appoint Tara Bowman as a math supervisor in the district for Kristen Wolf, who is leaving the district to take a position elsewhere. And we wanted to speak to this a little bit, just from the sake of the process and of the roles involved. Candidly speaking, because I think really of the timing of the vacancy, we did not have a lot of exciting applicants, with the exception of Ms. Bowman, frankly. Fortunately for us, Ms. Bowman has kind of worn a few hats in the district, where she's gathered experience working as a supervisor in the district, and she's actually filled this role as math department supervisor in the past. In this case, it would be her full-time position, her appointment in this tenure track role, because this time Ms. Wolf has resigned her position and is moving on elsewhere. So we're actually extremely excited that Ms. Bowman was willing to take on this role. Largely because of her experience. She's proven herself as a supervisor in this district, and also because of the fact that she has great experience around the district, having served in this capacity as a supervisor in our buildings. She's gotten to know the district very well, and she's been a math teacher in our district for many, many years, serving at William Annan Middle School largely. Given what we have going on in our math program, with proposals to make some adjustments possibly going forward, especially with the middle school math program, we're really thrilled to have her experience to be able to speak to these issues, and I recommend her heartily and with enthusiasm. Feel free to add whatever you like, Mr. Syed.
I couldn't have said it any better. Other than to say that we did, of course, post the position when Ms. Wolf resigned back in the middle of August, and Dr. Heineman did screen all the external applicants, and by far Ms. Bowman was the most qualified to serve in this capacity. So I do echo Mr. Markarian's sentiments. I think that the major advantage for Ms. Bowman, besides serving in this role, is that she brings almost 30 years of math experience as a teacher in the district, which is really a credit to her. And as Mr. Markarian said, at this time too, with some recommendations possibly coming in the middle and high school programming, it's important to have someone who has familiarity with the district already. So very excited about this opportunity for Ms. Bowman.
Are there any questions for Mrs. McEwen before we vote? All right, Mr. McLaughlin?
Mr. Byrne?
Yes.
Mrs. Gray?
Yes.
Dr. Dunton?
Yes.
Mr. Fry?
Yes.
Mrs. Richmond?
Yes.
Mrs. Korn?
Yes.
Mrs. Wooldridge?
Yes.
Mrs. McCune?
Yes.
Mrs. Swerner?
Yes.
Madam President?
All right, we're up to Policy Committee. It looks like there are 2 items to be moved. May I have a motion, please? Mrs. Korn and Mrs. Richmond for a second. Mr. Fry, do you have anything to report before we vote?
Yes, the Policy Committee meeting met on last week, and we have a few policies for first reading. Most of them are really not major changes, but just revisions to policy and regulations, so I will go through these. First one is services to non-public school students, and policy has incorporated extensive revisions on this one, so it has developed a new policy guide to replace the existing one. And the result is the Board of Education shall provide in accordance with the law and to the limit of state aid available for such purposes, services to pupils enrolled in non-public schools located within this school district, in which a child may legally fulfill compulsory school attendance requirements and which complies with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The next few policies and regulations are basically all grouped together. The first one, 7100, is long-range facilities planning. The Policy and Regulation Guide has minor coding revisions and has been updated to provide detailed guidance regarding long-range facilities plans. Policy 7101, Educational Adequacy of Capital Projects. The policy has been revised to align with coding revisions regarding the process for a school district to receive approval for capital projects and an additional section for capital projects not subject to educational adequacy review added to the regulation guide. Next one, 7102, Site Selection and Acquisition. These policy and regulation guides have been developed to align with coding revisions for the approval of the acquisition of land or facilities. The policy guide was updated to be more comprehensive in order to align with the new administrative code sections. These guides provide comprehensive guidance when a school district needs direction on receiving approval for school site selection and acquisition. 7130, School Closing. Policy has been updated to provide more detailed information on the assurances that a school district must provide to receive direction and approval to close a school. Fortunately, we don't have any of these things that are pertinent right now. And the last one, 7300, Disposition of Property. Not only property, but there are regulations on disposition of instructional property, disposition of land, disposition of personal property, and disposition of federal property. And all that falls under the 7300. This policy has several minor revisions regarding clarification of a district procedure to dispose of scrap or waste and provide guidance when a school district needs direction on disposal of school property. Those are the policies scheduled for first reading.
No changes on item 2 for second reading.
All right, any questions for Mr. Fry? Can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Byrne?
Yes.
Mrs. Gray?
Yes.
Dr. Denton?
Yes.
Mr. Fry?
Yes.
Mrs. Richmond?
Yes.
Mrs. Korn?
Yes.
Mrs. Wooldridge?
Yes.
Mrs. McCune?
Yes.
Mrs. Swerner?
Yes.
Madam President?
All right, we are up to item 15, Curriculum Committee Report. Mrs. Gray?
Yes, we have one. The committee met on September 8th. Mr. Heineman, or Dr. Heineman, excuse me, provided a list of potential topics for the 2017-18 forums. These are the sessions where different members of the administration visit the different buildings in the district and share a presentation on possibly the following: K-2 science program, standards-based report cards, dyslexia, transitioning from WAMS to Ridge High School, grammar usage and mechanics, fifth grade to WAMS transition, MAP testing, Go Math, and maybe even Aspen. Those dates will be coming in the next, I guess, couple of months, right, Brian?
We're going to try to get them out this week in Friday folder.
Okay.
Brian sent me a draft. We're just trying to get them finalized.
Okay. In math, Ms. Wolf introduced a proposal for a new math course sequence from grade 5 to 9. This proposal is specifically to address the need for a new course for the current fifth grade students who are in the GNT program. This group is the very first group that will complete the third through fifth grade telescope math program and will arrive at William Annan already having covered this math standards in grade 3, 4, 5, and 6. All the current math courses existing at William Annan will remain, and in the proposal there will be 3 additional courses. The first one is Accelerated Math 6, which will cover grade 7 and grade 8 standards and will prepare the telescope students for Honors Algebra 1 in 7th grade. Eligible sixth grade students must have completed G&T Math 5 or must meet the on-ramp criteria as designated in the proposal. Accelerated Math 7 would be the next new course. The course would cover 7th and 8th grade standards and would prepare students to take Algebra 1 or Honors Algebra 1 in 8th grade. Eligible 7th grade students must achieve a B+ or higher in Math 6. And the third new course proposed is Honors Algebra 1. This course covers Algebra 1 standards. The eligible 7th grade students must achieve a B or higher in Accelerated Math 6. Eligible 8th grade students must achieve an A or higher in Accelerated Math 7. This proposal eliminates the current G&T clustering that exists at William Annan and maintains the grade 7 math cycle. The committee expressed support for the proposal and offered some comments for consideration. 5th grade students may attempt to on-ramp to Accelerated Math 6. The proposal suggested that the students opt in to the testing, and the committee suggested an opt-out format to manage concerns that someone misunderstood the purpose of the testing. A second concern was whether we expect a significant number of students to on-ramp between 5th and 6th grade. And a third concern was the sequence change being targeted to address 6th grade students for 2018-19 does not address, does not address the often and long voiced concerns about the current math program at the high school. There was a lengthy discussion about issues with Honors Algebra 2 at Ridge High School. Mr. Markarian requested that Ms. Wolf consider these issues and bring a possible solution for October. One final concern was expressed about making Honors Algebra 1 available earlier than the rollout of this plan would currently provide for. I want to say we can discuss this. I'll just finish the report on the last item, and then we can talk in more detail. We received STEAM Year 1 results. They started with computer science. Ms. Wolf shared that the results and feedback on the computer science track at the STEAM Academy were very strong. Students earned slightly higher scores on the end of course assessment for those in the academy, but all but 2 students scored in the advanced proficient range. Students who chose the course as an elective also performed very well, with all but 1 student achieving proficient and advanced proficient. The survey results indicate that the students in the academy were a little bit more enthusiastic about the program. In the engineering track, Mr. Fackelman shared that the results in this track were disappointing. There were some struggles. Very few students performed at the advanced level, and quite a few earned only a basic score. The results were not consistent with what happened with Ridge students' report cards, which averaged A- for both the academy and the elective tracks. Mr. Fackelman recommended greater instructional support and additional program oversight to improve these outcomes. Survey results show that the academy and elective students had mixed feelings about the course, and 5 students did elect not to continue in the STEAM Academy. In the biomedical science track, Mr. Misiak shared that the results and feedback were off the charts, basically. It's a very challenging laboratory science. Academy students performed considerably better than the elective students on the end of course assessment. Elective students found the course more rigorous than they may have anticipated. Mr. Misiak also noted that there seems to be connection between math skills and success in this course. Since this is preliminary based on 1 year, they'll be watching that closely. Design and creation is the course that all academy students are required to take regardless of discipline. The feedback on this course was overwhelmingly positive among the students. They really enjoyed the course. There was a single complaint that would have been preferable to have a choice of elective rather than this one. Should the decision be made to discontinue the academy model, this course could be discontinued. It could also be continued strictly as a half-year elective to allow more schedule flexibility for an additional elective course for these students. STEAM students were surveyed about their music participation, and the vast majority of former music students reported that they did not schedule a music class because they did not wish to continue with the music program. A very small percentage stated that they did not take their music course because they would have to discontinue the STEAM track. And then we had a summer curriculum writing update that we didn't get to because we ran out of time. And I just want to say, we can discuss anything to do with the first one. I think we should hold off on any STEAM questions, because when we get to the SEL review, Mrs. McEwen has additional information that'll be valuable.
Okay. Any questions or comments or discussion for Mrs. Gray?
Sure, I'll ask some questions. So we're talking about changing the math program at the middle school, right? And for the Honors Algebra 1 in 8th grade, so only thing changing for the first year would be the 6th grade math, is that correct?
Well, in the proposal that we received, that is correct. There
Right
is committee concern that that might not be enough, which is part of why we're discussing it.
So what we're talking about here, we would want to change what was happening in 8th grade, because we feel like that would help kids who are going to go into the Honors Algebra 1 course.
Let me just clarify by saying that this proposal is a rollout, so yes, you are in fact correct. I don't think that was necessarily clear in my report, but it's a rollout. So in year 1, only Accelerated Math 6 would be introduced, and you would need to wait until year 2 to get the Accelerated Math 7 course, and so on, which means that the now 5th grade would be the very first year where the Honors Algebra 1 would be available to 8th graders.
Okay.
So this directly addresses the rising G&T group.
Which is how many kids?
40 students.
Okay. But how many more kids would be helped if we maybe accelerate this? Maybe put the Honors Algebra 1 in there so that,
Dr. Heineman?
like, how many more kids would be helped by doing that?
Hard to say until we go off the program.
But right now, we have kids taking Honors Algebra 1 in 7th grade, yes?
Can I just rephrase your question?
Sure.
I think what Mrs. Korn is asking is if we were to institute Honors Algebra 1 as available to 8th grade students effective next year, how many additional students would be benefiting from that opportunity?
But it would be more than 40.
Oh, yes, I think I can answer that one. So, but could we say that we have 2 or so sections of Math 8? Right.
A lot of students.
I think it's at least a couple sections.
Well, I was just thinking if we could take the top and the bottom and say they represent 2 or so sections of each, and then the middle is the split we'd be talking about, because the rest of them end up in algebra. Some would potentially be in Honors Algebra 1, and others would be in the Algebra 1 that we have for 8th graders now. Does that help?
I think so. I mean, because from what I've ascertained, is that kids who take these higher classes do better later, right? So we're going to give kids a chance to do better in the problem, which would be the
Honors Algebra 2.
Honors Algebra 2.
Yeah, right. I think the concern that we've been seeing for a number of years, which I think always existed to a certain degree, but I think was exacerbated when Common Core went in, is that the honors, both the CP Algebra 2 and Honors Algebra 2 got harder. And so the students who are trying to move up to honors later, who didn't take 7th grade algebra, which is like an honors course because it's more intense, I guess, the curriculum. So the students who are moving up later, they do okay. They get an A in algebra in 8th grade. They get into honors geometry, and they seem to do okay in most of them in honors geometry because it's different than algebra. And then when they hit algebra 2 honors, a lot of them struggle. And so we've, like year after year, hearing that this is a problem in algebra 2. So the thinking is that if they had taken the more accelerated version of algebra, they wouldn't be at a disadvantage because they're together with the students who are a year younger than them that had that other preparation. So I guess that's the thinking behind if there was an honors algebra 8th grade course. And so when we heard about this plan, we were happy to see that there was, but then we were concerned that it doesn't benefit anyone until the rollout happens, which is a number of years.
And then,
I don't know if I summarized that
no,
correctly.
I think you did a great job. I would just add that there's 2 parts to that. If we have to wait to roll it out year by year by year, and in fact, although the hope is that it will help with the honors algebra 2 problem, if it doesn't, it's 6 more years before we know that.
Seems like a really long time.
So what I asked, not Ms. Bowman yet, Ms. Wolf. Ms. Wolf to do was to take a look at sophomores in Honors Algebra 2 and just see what kind of results and history that she can collect on a few cohorts to the extent that she can get the data in the time that she has to collect the data to see, how many kids are we talking about who are sophomores in Honors Algebra 2 who seem to be struggling. And maybe that cohort of kids is somewhat representative of who might be in 8th grade Honors Algebra 1 if we partitioned the algebra sections in 8th grade to have some honors algebra students in them. So that's what we're taking a look at, and we can talk about that in October, because I want to see what those numbers look like.
One more question. And what's the biggest hurdle to implementing the 8th grade honors algebra 1 right now?
Probably just, scheduling it, seeing if it can be scheduled. I know there's a lot of concern about the team model at Annan. We've all been very committed to maintaining the team model at Annan over the years for the support that it provides the students. And the more you partition classes and have levels, the more challenging it can be. Doesn't mean that it's impossible, but it can make it more challenging to try to maintain fidelity to the team model and not having kids needing to be placed in such a way that it's hard to really say that there's a team of teachers that know a certain group of kids. So that's a big consideration. I think that in the grand scheme of things, students that currently might be sophomores struggling in Honors Algebra 2 would probably be well served if they had both Accelerated Math 7 and Algebra 1. Not just Algebra 1 honors, but both Accelerated Math 7 and Honors Algebra.
Right.
So you're getting both years of more math instead of just 1 year of more math, sort of. But I think the biggest hurdle is implementing a lot all at once and putting a lot of change on the middle school rapidly and trying to keep the team model at the same time is probably the big hurdle.
But for the G&T, you have to do it anyway, right? I mean,
Well, for the students coming in to 6th grade, you have to do something. Right.
Okay, Mrs. Woldridge?
Yeah, I just had a question about this Honors Algebra 1. My understanding is that the current 7th grade algebra class is an Honors Algebra 1. So I guess my question would be, how much new course development would be, how much new
I don't think
course
it's a new
development-
course. No, it's basically the
is
same thing. Yeah, it's an existing course. The new courses that have to be written are the Accelerated Math 6 and the Accelerated Math 7.
Okay, so the course development is not the limiting factor, it's the scheduling, is what you're
No,
saying?
I think 2 courses is not the end of the world to develop. It's more of how much change do you do all at once and try to make the schedule work well and still manage the team issue. And, you know, the more change you do at once, the harder it is.
We good with curriculum for now?
Pardon?
Are we good with curriculum for now? To be continued. All right, Advocacy Committee, Mrs. Richmond?
Advocacy met on September 11th, and we started out with all of the main business, going through contact information and PTO meeting schedule and things. We had a brief discussion about our meeting with Dr. Heineman and Ms. Shadis from June about things that the PTO presidents thought would be interesting presentations going forward for this current year. And Mr. Markarian was going to talk to the principals at each building and see which topics made sense for which building and what time of day, daytime at a PTO meeting versus a nighttime presentation kind of thing. And we would get a report back from him at the next meeting or whenever he could have that information. We talked about board meetings. I just reminded all the PTO presidents of when the board meetings are for the rest of this year. And just try to encourage more participation in coming to board meetings from them and just getting more involved and hearing what's going on at board meetings firsthand and reporting back to their boards and their communities so that just people have the correct information and it's not just all hearsay and things that they're hearing and reading on Facebook. We talked about in-service days, which there are 4 Wednesdays that were scheduled for this year. They are October 4th, November 18th, January 17th, and March 14th, where they will use those days as professional development for the entire staff district-wide. We just mentioned that Ms. Swerner and I would be meeting with Senator Kane and Assemblywoman Munoz on September 12th, and I can talk about that a little bit later about how that meeting went. Ms. Woolridge just announced that she and Ms. Korn were running for the upcoming school board election, and since Mr. Fry is not returning, is not running again, there is an open seat, and that 3rd seat will be filled by a write-in candidate that receives the highest number of votes. In terms of PTO donations, we just thanked all the PTOs for their generous contributions each and every year. Without their support and their money, we would not be able to roll out a lot of the special programs that are available to each school, and especially with enrichment programs. And Mr. McCarran was going to look into like what that final grand total was, because I'm sure it is a very impressive number. As you see, like just tonight was a huge number in and of itself. So he's going to report back on that. We just reminded the PTO presidents that if they are donating anything above $1,000, it requires a board resolution. Project planning, we just asked for their consideration to tell Mr. Markarian and Mr. McLaughlin as soon as they can, especially for big projects or anything that is going to require timing, like a plan to do, especially if it involves like capital facilities improvements. Mr. Markarian just talked a little bit about Aspen, how grades 6 through 12 were rolled out in August, and all the students received their new schedules that last week of August, and parents are expected to have portal information and log-on information sometime in October. Mr. Site reported out on September 5th, the entire staff of the district attended a presentation by Rick Wormley, a national board-certified teacher and internationally known speaker on middle-level education, innovation, and teacher professionalism. He talked to all K-12 staff about assessment, encouraging a shift from focusing on grading to learning and mastering content. He brought a lot of energy, and 90% of the staff provided feedback, positive feedback from that presentation. So that's like an unheard of amount of positive feedback. It's great. In other news, it was suggested that in terms of the new elementary K2, K1, standard-based report cards, the reporting out 3 times a year versus the normal 4 marking period, reporting out how it was going to be communicated to parents and explained to parents so that they understand the difference. Just reporting out sooner to them would be better. And there was a discussion on A to Z online directory, which is a PTO directory, online information, seems to come up every year. Kind of talked about that. I gave a full list of the PTO meeting, which were included at this, at the back of your minutes. If anybody wants to go to any of those meetings, if you could just let me know, just so I can keep a running total of how many people we are sending to those meetings so that we're not overwhelming any one particular school unless it's a big presentation, that would be great. And now in terms of the meeting that we have with Senator Kane and Assemblywoman Munoz, it was really great. There were 2 other Board of Ed representatives, one from Westfield and one from New Providence that were there, as well as a few New Jersey School Board Associate representatives. We talked about a lot of things in the hour that we were there. We talked about how we were talking about school funding and how, we would all like to see the schools have more fairer shares. But we did actually thank them for the little, the extra that we did get, and that how they asked how we used it, and we told them that we were using it for social emotional learning initiatives. We talked about the grants, the SBA grants that we got, and how we were using it for the HVAC projects. We talked about standardized tests and how the contract with Pearson is going to be expiring in 2018, and it remains to be seen what is going to happen with the new governor and where we go with all changes related to that. Somebody was talking about the COA and how that's going to affect each school has to pay attention to the COA numbers that are coming out from each of their towns. And did I forget anything?
No, I think you did a really good job, but if I can just editorialize, if I could pull out one key takeaway from this meeting, and I know that in particular Mrs. Korn on our board, and I think Mrs. White in the audience is going to want to hear this. We met with Senator Kane, who, by the way, is the Senate minority leader, so he wields quite a bit of power and influence in the state. When we met with him a year ago, and we brought up the issue of park and our concerns about the cost and the intrusiveness, and it wasn't an effective test. His response to us was, I fully believe in supporting park. We need a state standardized test. We approached him a little differently this year. Instead of saying we don't like park, we said we needed a standardized test that provided meaningful scores so we could evaluate how our students were progressing. And we talked about how, although park is a graduation requirement, there are so many outs to not take it, the scores we're receiving in district are not meaningful to us at all. And his response this time to me was, and I'm going to paraphrase, but it was more or less this message, I agree, we need a meaningful standardized test, whatever it may be. And then he went into the discussion about how the Pearson contract is expiring. So the takeaway from that is even the biggest park proponents are jumping off the ship. So I think that shows great promise in the near future for what's going to happen with park. In addition to meeting with, Mrs. Richmond and I met with Senator Kane and Assemblywoman Munoz. They emailed us not even a week later to say Assemblyman Bramnick wanted to meet with us as well. So today, Mrs. Woolridge and Mrs. McEwen met with Assemblyman Bramnick, and I think they wanted to report out briefly on how that went.
Yeah, it's going to be quite brief. It turned out that we were the only board members that attended this meeting with Assemblyman Bramnick, so we pretty much were able to get through, the agenda of what we wanted to talk about, and there was one representative from New Jersey School Board. So we pretty much covered the same ground as Mrs. Horner and Mrs. Richmond covered with Senator Kane. and talked about the additional funding that we had gotten. We talked about the fact that we've been underfunded, for a number of years, and that we're hoping that future legislation will improve the situation. Gave an update on the grants for the capital projects. We talked a little bit about the testing, especially at the high school level. And Assemblyman Bramnick, made a comment about Park being poorly implemented. So I think that there seems to be sort of a general kind of consensus.
They're all jumping ship.
Yeah, around Park at this point. So I guess we can hope that things will be different in the future. And I just mentioned also that the statewide shortage of bus drivers was a continuing problem, and that was pretty much it.
Yeah. The reality is there's not much happening legislatively here in New Jersey until the gubernatorial election has ended and everything settles down. But I just want to thank all of my colleagues who have helped in these efforts, because getting in front of these people's faces and making them aware of our issues really is going to help us in the future, because we have their ears, they know who we are now, and they're very aware of the issues impacting our town. Which leads me into item number 17, which is liaison committee reports, and I have one of those along the same line. I sit on the New Jersey School Board Association Legislative Committee, and a week ago, Saturday, September 16th, Mrs. Wooldridge and I went and spent our morning in Trenton as part of that committee, and I wanted to report out on some of the highlights from that. One of the big state school board initiatives this year is a new task force focusing on programming for the non-college bound student, which is something they feel we've been deficient at a state level for a while. They want to enhance that programming. Some good news, they have obtained over $280,000 in grants for training for school board leaders, for new board member training, and for county level meetings, including helpful speakers. So that's great opportunities for all of our board members here. They had someone come from the State Department of Education to give us an update on ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act. That part we found a bit disappointing. Their talk was really more focused on low-performing schools. And when I asked a question about parking and how, with new flexibility with ESSA, how does that help us as a district, they didn't really have a clear answer for us, but at least we asked. As far as an overall legislative update, basically, it's been quiet since June. They're not meeting. Everyone's up for election, and no one's focusing on any legislation at this point in time. There were 2 new appointments to the State Board of Education. The good news is both of them are actually local Board of Education members, which is great, because these are always political appointments, and they're not always individuals who know about how public schools operate. There is one new regulation that is coming down the pipe. I already sent Mr. Markarian an email about this one because everyone's a little concerned. They're amending the HIB regulations, so when a district has a special needs student outplaced and there is an appeal on a request, the sending district board serves as the appeal board. And they think this is going to come into play by January. So what that means is for any special needs child in an out-of-district placement, if there's contention with where they're placed and the school we've sent them to, we're going to have to serve as the appeal board. Did I communicate that fairly clear?
My understanding is it was for HIB.
For a HIB, I'm sorry, for a HIB.
It was for HIB, not placement.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't explain that well. For HIB situations for an appeal, we would have to sit as the appeal board for HIB situations of special needs out-of-district placements.
Right.
Yeah. And clearly, the New Jersey School Boards Association does not like this, but it doesn't look like we're going to be able to change it. And finally, last but not least, the New Jersey School Boards Association put together this excellent 16-page policy document on where the State School Board Association stands on every major issue. I actually took the time to read it, and it's quite excellent. Unfortunately, they did not have electronic availability yet, but I managed to abscond with a second copy, so I'm going to give one to Mr. Markarian to copy for all our board members and see maybe if we can get it posted on our district website somewhere. Are there any questions about the state legislative committee? Okay. Are there any other liaison reports this evening? No? All right, so next we are up to the ad hoc SEL committee report. Is there a report tonight?
Yes, there is. The committee met on September 14th. We had sort of another, I guess, part of the conversation about the STEAM Academy. At that point, the curriculum committee had already heard about the survey data from the students, the enrollment and achievement data. And so at the SEL committee, we talked more about some of the concerns about the application process, whether it's causing stress for students or pressure for them to commit to doing something for, the rest of their high school career when they're not, maybe at a place where they are ready to decide that, and kind of a little bit about the frenzy in the community about like kids trying to get in, concerns about it, and potentially just the fact that people maybe weren't aware that they could take these courses as electives, that it wasn't like that big of a deal, whether or not they got into the academy, they still would have access to the courses. I don't know how many people the first year around, really understood that. But the committee basically talked about how any modifications to the academy model would have trade-offs. We might address some of these concerns about the application process and stress and issues with it. However, we don't want to take away the experience of the students who are really enjoying these classes. And as the survey data showed, students are getting a lot out of these classes. So any changes would have to be done thoughtfully because there would be a trade-off there. We did talk about the idea of having a discussion with the board about whether the board felt that any modifications would be necessary potentially to either the application process or the academy model in terms of the design and creation class being mandatory, because that's a class that satisfies a fine arts requirement, and although it is a really, according to what everyone says, an amazing class, it's not critical to have taken that to do the Project Lead the Way sequence. So that would be one possibility, would be to allow students to satisfy their fine arts requirement in a different way, but yet still take the Project Lead the Way sequence. And so I guess that was kind of the gist of the conversation at the SEL committee. It was about the high school STEAM program. We also did discuss the STEM 8 course at WAMS. The STEM 8 course is a double period of science and STEM that's available to one section of 8th graders. So there were over 60 students that applied for it, and they're only able to offer the one section, mainly because of staffing. So that was disappointing to the other students who weren't able to, to get into it. There was also a little bit of concern in the community that somehow you had to get into that course in order to get into the academy at Ridge, which isn't true, but there was some frenzy surrounding that. So we did discuss that class. The committee asked questions about whether expanding it to have one section on each team, have 3 sections because the demand is there. But staffing is a big concern because it's hard to find technology teachers. And so that was kind of where that conversation left off. Several board members expressed the opinion that 8th grade math might be a priority before adding more other STEM classes in 8th grade. Then at the committee meeting, Mr. Markarian talked about the climate surveys that were given last spring. So as most of you would remember, there's a student survey, parent survey, and staff survey at all the schools. Mount Prospect had just done its own climate survey, so they did not have this survey at their school, but the other schools all did. So Mr. Markarian reviewed the format of the survey because it had been a while since we looked at it. The first part of the survey was made up of questions from the Rutgers and Department of Education climate survey. So we basically used their survey so that we can look at that data compared to other districts. And then part B was made up of local questions that pertain to our district, specific concerns, including some questions for the high school that students came up with. So the data is still being tabulated. The staff, or the principals and everyone were very busy getting Aspen set up over the summer, so they're still in the process of getting it all together to present. We did look at like a little preview of some of the data just to see how it would report out. So Mr. McCarran showed us a little bit of the student results from Ridge and WAMS just to show how the data would look when we look at it. With a few questions that we looked at, looked interesting. So I'm sure everyone's eagerly awaiting the results of that survey, and it will be presented at an upcoming Board of Ed meeting. Let's see. There were two other short items at the committee meeting. We gave some feedback to Mr. Markarian that we've gotten over the years about awards night at Ridge, and so that he can pass that along to Mr. Kraus. Some of the issues were just logistical, like sometimes parents or students not seeing that they got an invitation, or somehow not realizing they were invited. The fact that the evening is very long, but yet there's still awards that somehow, don't get onto the agenda because there's so many different kids in our community winning all kinds of scholarships and amazing awards. Some awards are presented at the senior breakfast, but not at awards night. There's always been some debate about what should be at awards night. So maybe it could be divided up into multiple nights, or some criteria established. So he's going to give that feedback to Mr. Kraus. I just brought a flyer to show to the SEL committee about an event in Flemington Raritan. They're hosting a social media night that is open to the public, parents and staff and whoever wants to attend. And of course, I have the link in the minutes, but I don't have the date right here. So I will look that up in a minute. It's October 4th. It's a Monday night, and it's like from 5:30 to 8:30. I think it's on their you can get it on their website. If you go on the Flemington Raritan School District website, there's a link to it on there. It looks very interesting. And then we talked a little bit about the fact that we're going to be talking about the rotating drop schedule at board forum tonight, which we will be doing. And that was it. Does anyone have any questions?
Okay. We're now up to item number 19, which is public comment on non-agenda items. This is your opportunity to comment to the public on anything that's on your mind. Please try to limit your comments to 5 minutes. Sign in, state your name and address. I think you know the drill.
Jennifer White, 65 Winding Lane. First, let me just say, this setup, I don't know if you like it, but I always sit in the back. I can hear you all so much better than when you're facing each other, especially the people at the side, so thank you. Since so much has been discussed about stress on students in the past few months, which I greatly, greatly appreciate in relation to homework and summer work, I just wanted to bring up another issue that is related to that, that's caused much angst and stress for my middle schoolers and my high schoolers, and it has to do with group projects. I first just want to say, I think that there is great merit to group assignments. It's important for students to learn how to work with others, to share their ideas, work towards a common goal. But I've seen the same problem crop up at the middle school as I see it in the high school. And for those who aren't familiar, I have this year a 7th grader, a 9th grader, and an 11th grader. So I'm really feeling this now with my 9th grader. And when the problem crops up in the middle school level, I've always been able to say to them to quiet the anxiety, it's okay. It's middle school. These grades, they don't go anywhere after here. But I can't say that to a high school student. I can't say to them, your grade on a group project's not going to matter, because the reality is that it does. For the most part, I have found that students are placed in random groups. And what that means is you're working with students that may not have the same abilities or the same work ethics as your own child. And it can be very, very frustrating and extremely stressful to be in a situation where you feel you've done your part, but the other members of your group have not, or haven't done it to what you know you would have done had you been doing it on your own. And a lot of the work seems to be done in Google, so I don't really understand why there can't be that ability to see when you assign one of these projects who's logged on, who's done the work, and more importantly, why there isn't a component where not only do you have to turn in the group project, but you have to turn in your individual portion of the group project. Because I think that really is the crux of the problem, which is everybody in a group is not going to put the exact same effort in. And if you end up in a random group with students who don't have the same work ethic and the work value, that grade can really affect you and pull your grade down. And that is extremely frustrating and stressful to kids who are putting 100% of their time in. So I guess what I'm asking is, I know you've been looking at the homework and the amount, and I appreciate that, but if this piece could also be addressed. I know it's in the policy that group assignments can only be assigned for homework when students have the ability to work on their individual portion. But there also then needs to be a time before it is due to come back together so that all the students can look at what they've done and say, hey, you didn't do this, and this is part of the assignment. So, thank you.
Thank you. Other public comment? All right, so public comment is closed, and I think our SEL committee people have noted that additional issue to be addressed. So now we're up to board forum. We have one topic that is on the agenda, and that's the rotating drop schedule. That is something that we began exploring a few years ago. It kind of got quiet, and now in light of the potential of this new type of high school schedule, possibly alleviating stress and making life a little easier for our students, we're going to investigate it again. We talked a lot about how to address this because unlike a lot of other things that the board address, this crosses every functional area of what we do. There are curricular implications, there are financial implications, there are personnel implications. We're ad hoc committee to death. Everyone is so overextended. And we've made the decision as a group that this is the one thing we're going to work on as a committee of the whole, which means we will only be having conversations about this as a full board at our public meetings. The way we're going to be approaching this is each of our individual committee chairs has polled the members of their committees to get questions on how their particular committee responsibility area, whether it is finance or policy or advocacy, could potentially be impacted by a rotating drop schedule. Right now, our committee chairs are collecting all of these questions. They're going to take them back to committee. They're going to work through answers and identify areas for additional exploration. And then we're going to take all of this feedback, and at board forum, at all of our meetings, we're going to be discussing what we're learning and start working through our thought process of how we move forward with this idea. So, we don't have the questions collected yet, but I sure would love any thoughts or inputs on how we can best move forward with this issue. Does quiet mean that it makes sense, that this is a good approach? Yeah, it just seems like if you're not sitting on curriculum committee, you probably still care about the curricular impact of the rotating drop. If you don't sit on personnel, you still want to know what our teachers feel about the rotating drop and how it's going to impact the way they educate our students. So this is something we'll be discussing all year. Are there any other issues for board forum? Oh, this is great.
I think we need to discuss the STEAM topic that was mentioned in both curriculum and SEL reports, because what we've done is we've kind of reported and laid it at the feet of the board, but there's some discussion to be had and either a decision to act or not act to change or maintain the program as it exists at Ridge.
Okay.
Okay. Seem to be doing a lot of talking today. That's what I do anyway. About the STEAM, I think that the ad hoc, when I read about, you're right, about like some kids really like it, they joined it, they expected, but I feel like those kids can keep going. Is there a way to like phase it out? I think more kids should be able to take these classes that these kids love. And I feel like it's limited now.
I just want to say something that doesn't come up often enough, and Dr. Heineman, please feel free to correct me if I say this incorrectly, but with virtually no exception, any student that wanted to enroll in one of these courses was able to do so as an elective. In this current year, 17-18, the exception was the engineering track where we had an issue with a staffing problem, so we didn't have the coverage to provide for those additional, I think it was maybe 2 sections of students. But otherwise, like last year, pretty much everyone who requests the class is able to get it as an elective if they did not get into the academy.
All right, so then,
That said, the survey that was shared with the curriculum committee that was in the packet for board members showed that students in the academy consistently performed better than students that were taking it as an elective. And Mr. Misiak in particular said this, I think, quite honestly. There may have been a lot of senioritis, particularly with the biomedical, which is a rigorous course that, you need to be up for a lab science. So I don't think we're shortchanging anyone, to your concern. The question is, all those other factors, the question of whether or not we want to require these students to maintain that design and create, which was customized strictly so that we could have an academy that has a fine arts requirement component so it meets the state graduation requirements. So is it best to leave it alone? Is it best to say maybe we want to allow those students to continue their music pursuits or their other art pursuits? Do we want to talk about the possibility of continuing with the Project Lead the Way certificate opportunities and maybe ask that the counseling department provide an opportunity for students to express their interest in the path? So when they enroll as a freshman, maybe they say right then and there, I really do want to try to take the 3 years. Can you help me make that happen while still maintaining the academy? Or go in the complete opposite direction and and I'm not really making a recommendation here, I'm just sort of reiterating the discussion that's been had, just for clarity.
Dr. Dunton?
Well, I like the idea of offering, the pathway for children to select, students to select, versus selecting students for the academy. As a public school, I haven't been a huge fan of this selective academy within the school model, particularly the impacts on the other fine arts. It's one of those things where you're forcing students to choose something at a young age to the exclusion of the other. The students, who want to do art or music, if they want to be in this academy, then you can't do it all. So they have to make this choice in 8th grade. I think it's a little premature to be like giving up the high school music program when they haven't even tried it yet. And I think that we are successfully creating an interest so that there's enrollment outside the academy. So the argument that we need to have an academy to make these courses successful, I don't think is proved to be true, which was an argument that was floated at the beginning of establishing the academy. So that's just a couple of points I'd like to put out there.
Anyone else? Mrs. McEwen?
I think Mrs. Gray already said this, but I would like to, if we're going to change the model, I would like to make sure that there's a way for students to indicate that they want to do the sequence, when they're starting to schedule, whether they start as a freshman or a sophomore and they want to do the 3 years. I would like, I wouldn't want to just, I mean, I know we were able to satisfy the requirement, you know, the first year that most of the students who wanted it as an elective got it, but, you know, every year is a little different with electives and stuff. So I wouldn't want students to start down the path and get through 2 of the courses and then not be able to get the third. I would think that if they were already in the program, they should get priority, I guess, starting with whoever needs it for graduation, so.
All right. I think most of the points were reiterated again during board forum. The one piece I found most troubling, and I read the detailed report that was part of the curriculum minutes, is the engineering track and how the success rates and the level of student satisfaction is so disparate from the other 2 tracks. So clearly that track needs to be addressed. If I can make a suggestion to the board, if you'll recall when we had our retreat last month with Gwen Thornton from School Boards Association, she defined the role of board members, where our job is to oversee policy, but it's really the administration's responsibility to implement and tell us what needs to be done. Based on what I'm hearing in all this feedback, what would make the most sense to me, if the board concurs, is to go back to the administration and just ask them to propose a modification to the STEAM program to move forward for us to review. Is that something that the board would be interested in saying? Okay, does that make sense? So I think that's a good way to move forward, and maybe we'll have something. Mrs. Wooldridge?
Yeah, the only thing is, I do agree, and I think it would be nice, since the design and creation class is not required, it would be nice for 9th graders to have the option to stay in music if they wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
And that way they could have a chance to kind of try out the high school music program, at least, and even though they were still able to take all the Project Lead the Way courses.
Yeah. I'm hearing from Mr. Markarian that the administration's going to try to come up with a proposal that's consistent with the feedback that they've been hearing from the board. So,
Can I just add one thing? Because I know there's been a lot of discussion, and for the public's edification, I think it's only fair to say that the very detailed and complete STEAM Academy survey, student survey, indicated that the vast majority of there's only 60 students in the program. The vast majority of them elected not to take music, not because they were taking STEAM, but because that was the path they were choosing when given another option.
okay. All right. Do we have anything else for board forum this evening? I just want to comment. I'm glad that you're hearing us better and that this works. From this perspective, it's not working great because it's really hard to run the meeting when you can't see the people who are contributing. So maybe we'll look and see if there is a modified way to do this, where it's not quite a shallow U, but not quite a deep U, maybe a medium U. I don't know. It's just been very challenging for me tonight because I can't see who wants to talk and who has things to say.
To bring a circular saw.
Yeah, Mr. Markarian will bring a circular saw to the next meeting and we'll make it all work. But I'm glad you're hearing us better because that is important. All right, so there is no more board forum comments. So we vote on the adjournment, right?
Yeah.
Ask for a motion to adjourn.
Yeah. So we're going to do this a little differently because Mr. Crute informed us we've been doing this wrong for all these years. First, I need a motion for adjournment, please. Dr. Dunton, second, Mrs. Wooldridge. And now we actually need to vote. Can it be a hand vote or do?
Absolutely.
Okay, so by a show of hands, who's in favor of going home? There we go. I think, is anyone opposed? Well, good. Then we are adjourned. Thanks for coming out tonight.